All right, all right. I think I got my mark right here, maybe a little right, maybe. Welcome to another experiment on the channel here. I'm going to talk about health today, and what I want to do is break down the concept of responsibility and how it relates to health. And I think it's a really powerful contemplation for you guys, and it's something that's been valuable in my life. And there's that's four, right? But there's two concepts I really want to break down. And one of them is how responsibility is a core pillar and the foundation of all health, and how individual responsibility plays into that, because I see that as a lighthouse concept for people right now, and in the future for what's coming, because the support systems I see breaking down around a shared responsibility are going to require, I think, more of us to recognize our own responsibility in our health, which is actually true and fundamental. And whether or not society was doing this or that, I think this is the most powerful kind of concept that's core to health. And because of our times that we're living in, I think it's especially relevant or topical. The other concept I want to break down is how the two concepts of health and responsibility are actually synonymous. And maybe I'll start there, because this is an interesting and maybe more original idea, even though it's not my idea. It felt original in a way to me when I first encountered it at the depth that I sort of want to transmit to you guys. It was in Sadhguru's inner engineering program. He's amazing. Anyone who's ever done that stuff or followed his work, I'm sure, shares my appreciation of the man. Health and responsibility, synonymous. You might have noticed even when I just said it, responsibility, if you break responsibility down into sort of those two pieces of the word that create it, it really helps to drive this concept home. And most people, at least when I was growing up, the responsibility was sort of more akin to blame in some cases, or even it was an obligation or something that, people did not want. And yet, again, as I've come around to another side of looking at it, it's become one of the most empowering concepts to adopt. And this is something I was doing my whole life before I really made it, as conscious as I have. Taking responsibility for my health, taking responsibility for, my actions. That's sort of a virtue that is ubiquitous, but here's my version of it in a way for you guys. And obviously, people that have followed my work in parkour will, mostly be parkour athletes themselves, and they all recognize, whether they recognize it actually or not, they are participating in an activity that demands a certain level of responsibility for yourself, because by and large, you're doing it all alone, essentially making the decisions on your own, checking surfaces on your own. And of course, one of the main things we have to deal with as parkour athletes in our space is battling the knowing that we have and we will take responsibility for ourselves, and then sort of the society at large, civilization, property owners coming at you with another angle, which is they're all worried about getting sued if you're going to get hurt, because again, sort of the foundation of the culture in many ways has not really absorbed this concept. And so there's a culture of suing people and making someone else responsible for the choices you're making, and trying to, cash in on that. And of course, that's not the only thing those laws are in place for, but we can see how they get abused. And that's why parkour can become a really interesting agitator in society, because it goes against that grain. So anyway, responsibility, again, what is health except your sort of life force and being alive and feeling not dead is another way to think about it. And if you compare that to being dead, well, your response ability when you're dead, the ability to respond, is zero when you're dead, essentially, at least from the observable material world. And there's arguments against that, but you get the point I'm making, I'm sure, where, if you poke someone with a stick and they're just a corpse, you wouldn't probably want to do that, maybe, unless you're finding out if they're alive. That's, you're checking their responsibility to see how living is this thing, how healthy is it, is another. So you can see now how the two concepts really start to become more synonymous, because the more response able you are, or the greater your ability to respond, the more alive you are, and the more alive you are perceived as. Because again, I'll go to parkour as my go-to, always, pretty much. The ability to respond to the environment and be able to do something ridiculous, flipping over a roof or something like that, showcases a certain level of vitality and health and just, ability to respond to the environment that most people don't have. And again, it requires, and is synonymous in many ways. That was one of the greatest elevations in my health journey, was to find parkour and discipline myself through it to become healthier and become elite in my performance, to some people's definitions. I mean, I'll take it. So there's that. And what else do I want to say about this? Yeah, hopefully you get it. Simply put, health is responsibility. And the more you're able to respond, the greater your health. And actually, when you start taking on responsibility for everything, which is the next concept I really want to pull in here, the greater your health can be. Because fundamentally, you are responsible for your life, whether you sort of see it that way or not. And of course, there's lots of intricacies in life, so that you really can't make any blanket statements like that, or even use language without sort of neglecting an entire important aspect of life. And this is one of the most foundational, most ubiquitous, and hard to straw man concepts, in my opinion, because it is so true. Again, this is our responsibility as we're born into this world, is to take care of ourselves. And really, who could do it better than us, right? There's no one, again, barring some of the exceptions, there's no one who's more in touch with who you are, what you want, what would make you healthy than you. No one could be, because again, the whole sort of gift and miracle of existence and being alive and being incarnated is that you get to have a completely unique journey in figuring it out. And you're not supposed to replicate anyone else's journey per se. There's no one that can really do it better than you. Now, there are people that can help you in certain domains, but again, life is so complex. Of course, those are not essential to the core of who you are. You are the one who's figuring that out. And especially when it comes to health, this has become a very hot topic, because the question is, if you're not responsible for your health, then who is? And some people, again, make the doctors responsible, or the government, to legislate around what's healthy and what isn't, or mandate even what is healthy, and who and how they should participate in communal health care. And as we've seen in the last, especially with the pandemic, but even long before that, there's been evidence of this cracking at the foundation, because when you try to make others responsible for your health, you're out of alignment with really the core of the truth of it all. It's unfortunate, because it is a nice sentiment. I do think that, again, the ultimate goal is to be so responsible for just yourself that you actually have even more responsibility. You can start to take on the ability to respond on behalf of others. And so then those contingencies that we sort of talked about, people that don't have quite the same levels of health as you do, you can start to become responsible for them. And the government structures that exist and the legislation that exists really is all there because somebody did have and elevated their sense of responsibility enough, or a group of people elevated their sense of responsibility enough to then become a barrier against those who would otherwise corrupt or, capitalize on people's inability to respond. And that's beautiful, and you cannot do that for everybody. And it's not efficient, first of all, even if it could be done. Could we imagine a government that can really take care of everyone's unique needs in health, because we all have very unique bodies and different goals? And we all sort of disagree around what we want to eat and how, and those types of things can be really, really hard to get consensus around. And I just want to acknowledge that I'm not a maximalist in this individual responsibility per se. I just recognize that we're moving away from certain structures and things because we're not at a level of consciousness that we can handle that concept where we all kind of become responsible for each other and these structures really exist. Unfortunately, because so many people are rejecting or abdicating their responsibility for their health, and they rely on the government structures, and because it requires all of us to take responsibility to actually make that society where we have the government structures that are correct in place, because then no one's corrupting it in a sense, or less people are going to be misaligned by leaning on the programs and the structures that might exist in a way that is detrimental to the whole, because they're trying to, again, reject or abdicate responsibility, dish it out somewhere else, make somebody else responsible, then they become a sort of parasite on the system, right? And so it's a paradox, as many things are, in that while we all want to build that utopia, and I have very strongly actually support people like Bernie Sanders who want to bring universal health care to the masses and bring health care to people that can't afford it, or follow the lead of some of the other industrialized nations that have already done this. What healthcare is one of these things that kind of gets overlooked in that conversation, and how people want to take care of themselves and how other people do want to take care of themselves. It can be very, very different, to the point where then the government gets caught trying. You can't do both at once potentially, or you maybe could, but only if people start taking responsibility and not necessarily relying on this principle, but making it happen. So I hope that makes sense. It's hard for me to even articulate to myself, honestly, so this is a good exercise. We talked about how health is responsibility. We talked about expanding it to become more responsible for others. And we talked about how you need to be responsible for yourself. I guess the last thing I want to do is just kind of, why the hell should you be listening to some dude in a Buc-ee's t-shirt, or Buc-ee's desert short sleeve button-up about this? And that's a good question, because who the hell should, again, I'm telling you, you should be the arbiter of your health decisions. And actually, the only way we all can build the society, or even just the life we want, is to take responsibility for our health choices. I want to share the journey that I've been on that kind of illuminated this and made me want to stand behind this sort of video, because when I've neglected or trusted, an entity like healthcare, mainstream healthcare, it has not always led me. It has supported me in certain scenarios, and I would argue in more scenarios than not, more scenarios than it's helped me, it's actually offered a temporary and sort of low resolution solution. So it offers a sort of pacifier solution, or it kicks the can down the road, is another way I think of it. It's not actually a real solution like the ones that I found outside of mainstream healthcare. And mostly that has to do with the fact that they have to monetize it, and so they're trying to grow things, and it's all profit driven. And so it's sort of, again, it's an out of alignment with the truth of health, which is you want to have people not subscribed to medications and building lifetimes of extra, billing to the hospital or to the drug companies, or, other people that are standing to make a profit from this stuff. But you actually want to heal people, and then they don't need you anymore. And that's where health, that's a metric of health that actually is indicative of health and what solutions, but it's counter to everything that the system is sort of oriented towards. And that's, I think, why the solutions, they work, but they only work as well as they need to get you to come back a little bit later and buy something again. Because ultimately that's where that whole system is. It's maybe rooted in wanting to help people, and it's also very corrupted by that. But, I think we can all agree. That's why when, what's his name, Luigi, murdered that dude, people celebrate it. I mean, this is an absurd time to live in when someone can get assassinated and everyone's like, fuck yeah. It's absolutely, horrible. We don't want to see that, obviously. And also, we understand it because we don't trust and we don't respect the people anymore that are making the most money and offering the least amount of help. I'd like to finish again with my sort of health journey and why the choices that have kind of built this point of view for you. So when I was little, I had asthma, diagnosed pretty early on, and what I know now is that probably had a lot to do with the stress and the nutrition that was experienced by my mom, even in her pregnancy with me, just because, again, these things are relatively not known, especially in her generation. The further back you go, the harder it is to find until you kind of get back far enough where there's no bullshit and it's all survival, and some of that stuff, again, actually starts to look good again. And so people go into paleo diets and stuff like that because of that. But there's like this trough in between us in alignment with nature and now many ways and many dimensions, across many dimensions, out of alignment with nature. And we're kind of, I think, working our way back sort of out of necessity because, again, life must go on, or life, the things in, that we want to survive. And so there's different ways that it's happening, but we're getting back in alignment because either Mother Earth or whatever you believe in, God, or the inner things that are guiding us, they are forcing our hand on or some of our hands. Some of us embrace this willingly, or even ahead of the curve, and part of really building that wave. But asthma was a first diagnosis, and again, the solution that they have is, here's an albuterol inhaler, suck on that for the rest of your life anytime you're in trouble. It's a responsibility diminishment in some ways. My responsibility is now sort of dependent on whether or not I have my inhaler. So great if I have my inhaler. It did, people who've had asthma, I'm sure there's success with using albuterol, this little stimulant. What is it called? Steroid. It's a steroid, I think. And yeah, it helped expand my lungs when I was feeling asthmatic. And again, it's sort of a dependent thing. If I have to carry this thing around with me for the rest of my life, it could be an emergency situation. And what I found, of course, through finding literally that out, because I would forget it places, or I'd run out of the cartridge, or I'd just run out. And then when I would go through asthma attacks of sorts without the inhaler, and I was just sort of forced to figure out a slower rate of breathing because my body was, again, adapting just the way we kind of mentioned with my hand being forced. It's like, well, I have to breathe. So I'm figuring it out. I'm learning breathing techniques as a child on the fly because I don't have my inhaler with me. And then the asthma attack would go away and I would return to normal. And I realized, so there is solutions, and my body actually can figure this system out, this asthma thing out, without the inhaler. This is interesting. I wonder how far I can take that. And so as I sort of got off the meds, or I would kind of just leave it, I started to leave it at home on purpose. I started to, and around 12 years old, I just never took it with me again. And I don't have asthma anymore, essentially. I mean, except that I sometimes do, because I realize now, again, there's nutritional things, there's nutritional deficits, there's stress deficits. So if I get really stressed and I'm undernourished, yeah, I can experience asthma-like symptoms. But when I'm taking care of myself and I take responsibility for myself, I actually have more freedom now than I ever did, because I don't need an inhaler, and I have a greater awareness around what's happening in my body. So I understand when I'm stressing myself too far, or if I'm not eating as healthy as I probably should, I can pick up on the symptoms pretty quick. So it's been a gift, again, like everything in the long run. And that was, one example. So that's probably the biggest prime example, and that's sort of the beginning of it all, but there's many others along the way. I mean, when I got into parkour, I was getting terrible shin splints in my, tibia and fibula, or maybe just the tibia. I don't know if you get them in both bones. And again, there was still nutrition deficiencies. I had been able to build myself up enough to not use the inhaler. And also I did a lot of damage probably in high school and college, drinking heavily and, using drugs pretty recreationally. I would say an average rate for CU Boulder, which is pretty high for the average of universities, but there you go. Good times, SCO buffs. And at the same time, when I started getting into parkour, I had a desire and a motivation to drop some of those addictions and maybe bad habits or whatever, and pick up better nutritional habits and understand things, because this is another great mentor of mine, Dr. Ken Cow, had turned me on. He was a chiropractor at the time, to the real miracle of alternative nutrition and understanding what kind of water are you drinking. Are there minerals in it? Are there toxins in it? What's your diet doing? I learned about sugar intake. I learned about gluten intake. I learned about all the things. I started there, and I was highly motivated because I wanted to train parkour, but I couldn't when my shins hurt. So getting that under control, again, elevated me to all of a sudden now I could train without shin splints. Wow. And again, this was counter to everything I had been told, or really everything that's offered in sort of the mainstream narrative about what's healthy, because everything is just healthy enough to not kill you, but to keep the money machine printing, essentially, right? That's really, that's sort of the North Star for our entire civilization right now. You have to go against the grain if you actually want to get these gains of nutrition and exercise and things like that. So again, taking responsibility. I started taking responsibility for my asthma, for my shin splints, and again, this built me into a much more capable athlete, and I was able to, with my training in parkour, even build my mind in certain ways and do things with mental health that, again, had continued to advance me into now, who knows where we're going. The sky's the limit, right? Not even, fuck the sky. I'll fucking blast through that sky, son. I hate that saying. Actually, it's a fine saying, but I just like to question all these idioms, because again, idioms are some of the stuff that goes unquestioned, and it's sort of the bullshit glue that holds all this together where people don't examine it. All right, that was a lot longer than I had hoped it would be, and hopefully it made a lot of sense. We'll keep going. If you guys, the last thing, here's the real last thing I wanted to say. I don't, again, really, I'm on an experimental phase with the channel. I'm in an experimental phase. I'm enjoying it, and I am looking forward to doing more stuff, whatever it is. And if you're interested in doing a podcast with me, I think one of the things that some people know about me, but most people probably wouldn't, is that I like to be reached out to more than I'm kind of I can be a hermit sometimes. I'm not necessarily going to do a lot of the reaching out. I'm getting more and more aggressive on that and trying to, again, break that sort of habit. And at the same time, I just know myself enough to know that if you're actually really interested in having a conversation or doing something on the podcast or reaching out, or if you just have an idea, you don't have to want to be on it, but if you want to do something or you want to see something happen on this channel, I am inviting you to invite me to do that. So please check it out, and if you have an idea or if you want to see something, please throw it down in a message or whatever, and I'd love to hear it, because that stuff gets me out of bed a lot quicker than me just making a video like this, which is pretty cool and fun to make because I like to try something new, and it is easy when I don't have to coordinate with anything. And I'd like to have more adventures with people involved and get other people's consciousness involved. So we'll do some of these solo blasts like we've been doing for since the beginning of the channel, but I want to also maintain the thread and invite you guys to connect with me or connect with the channel by creating some of the ideas that happen here. All right, and with that, I'll see you on the next one.